Hey guys, Jay Steven here. So, continuing with our discussion of the Northern Crusades, last time we talked about the Sword Brothers and the Knights of Dobrin. Today, I want to give an overview of the structure and organization of the most important of the military orders involved in the Northern Crusades, the Teutonic Knights. So, to start off here, I want to read a brief passage from Christopher Tyerman's book, God's War. Crusading in Prussia was of a very different stamp to the dingy campaigns of the far north and left a more obvious mark. If anywhere it could be described as a crusader state, it was the principality created by the Teutonic Knights in 13th century Prussia. Even more than Livonia, medieval Prussian institutions and identity were forged out of a continuous holy war and rule by a military order whose authority, while repeatedly challenged by natives and pagan neighbors, was recognized by pope and emperor alike, and sustained by permanent access to crusade privileges, preaching, and formulae. So between 1211 and 1225, the Teutonic Knights helped King Andrew of Hungary to protect his eastern Transylvanian border against the attacks of the Cumans. During this process, the Teutonic Knights did a lot of the heavy lifting. They built some fortresses and basically were quite useful to King Andrew. However, once the job was done, King Andrew basically expelled them from his territory and left them with nothing as a result of their work there. And so this made them quite wary of getting too closely tied to the efforts of another crowned head of Europe. So a little bit later, when a Polish duke, Conrad of Mazovia, asked the Teutonic Knights to get involved in helping him defend his duchy from raids by the pagan Prussians, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, Hermann of Salza, was wary, and he insisted first on gaining some sort of autonomy in the activity of the Teutonic Knights in Prussia. Now, at this time, they were mainly involved in the Holy Land. They participated in Frederick II's Sixth Crusade, or what is called the Sixth Crusade in terms of the numbered crusades to the Holy Land. And eventually, the Teutonic Knights were able to gain a grant from Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, and also from this Duke Conrad, that basically the Teutonic Knights would have a certain amount of autonomy in Prussia, that their conquests in Prussia would be held as lordships of the order. So they would not be under the thumb of Duke Conrad or any other nobleman. So this was 1229, and at this point, the Teutonic Knights get involved in Prussia, and so begins the Great Prussian Crusade of the Teutonic Knights. So, in their activity in Prussia, the Teutonic Knights had several advantages. First of all, they had independence, as we just discussed. They were not like the Sword Brothers, dependent on a specific bishop. In the case of the Sword Brothers, they were dependent on Bishop Albert entirely, but they acted as an independent order, much like the Templars or the Hospitallers. At the same time, they had the support of the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II. Now, the Teutonic Knights did have a certain allegiance to the German Emperor, and in some respects, they existed as a part of the imperial sphere of influence, as the Grand Master, Hermann von Salza, was almost a part of the German Emperor's court. But nevertheless, they had independence as an order. They also had the support of crusade bulls from the papacy, authorizing their activity in Prussia as a crusade. So this was something that individuals could gain an indulgence from by their participation. And in 1245, in fact, Pope Innocent IV gave full indulgences to all those who fought in Prussia, and granted this whether they responded to a papal appeal or an appeal from the Teutonic Knights. So that's basically the perpetual crusade that Christopher Tyerman was talking about in that passage we just read. So this was an incredible advantage to the Teutonic Knights. Basically, they controlled recruitment to their crusade. So they could gain crusaders from other parts of Christendom through their own activity, and they could recruit with the power of the indulgence behind it. So they can. This is incredible. They controlled recruitment. They weren't reliant on specifically the papacy to bring crusaders into their fold. And this was very necessary because to bolster their efforts, they needed continual streams of crusaders coming in from Christendom, serving for a while, and then returning. Meanwhile, the Pope was having clergy preach the Prussian Crusade throughout Central and Northern Europe, so there was widespread popularity for this campaign. Now, unlike the Sword Brothers and the Knights of Dobrin, who were constantly scrounging for assistance from Christendom, the Teutonic Knights were flooded with assistance. Their crusade was very popular. They were an international order who had estates all over Europe, and so they were well known, and they were attracting a lot of donations. The 1230s were really a period of time of a lot of activity. A lot of the major conquests were made at this time, and a lot of fortresses were built. In 1232, there were 7 Polish dukes who came to assist with the crusade. In 1233, Henry, the Margrave of Meissen, arrived. The Duke of Austria came at one point, and even King Ottokar of Bohemia arrived and participated in crusading with the Teutonic Knights. A lot of the secular nobility who came out to help with the Prussian Crusade were previous donors or allies of the Teutonic Knights. So the Teutonic Knights were able to work their connections back in Europe. And a lot of their patrons, if you had donated or something like that, you might want to come out and be involved in some of this crusading. And the Teutonic Knights were very efficient and very well organized, and they were able to organize these campaigns quite well so that nobles and knights could come out, get involved in a campaign, make some conquests, and then head home when the campaigning season was over. And the Teutonic Knights could then garrison and secure that conquest with their personal presence, and they could hold it through the winter months against counterattacks from the native Prussians. And so we can see how this was very systematic, and it was quite effective. Now, crusading was very popular in the 13th century. A lot of secular nobility wanted to get involved. For a lot of the secular nobility, Prussia was quite a bit closer than Palestine. The campaign in Palestine, was going to require usually at least a year's commitment. However, a lot of nobles could travel to Prussia and be involved in a campaign in a matter of weeks, and then return home, and meanwhile pick up that indulgence, and at the same time have the prestige of having been involved in one of the important fronts of crusading in Christendom. And indeed, the front in Prussia was one that was considered to be quite legitimate. People prized this front quite a bit unlike, say, the activity going on in Constantinople. The results of the Fourth Crusade, there was some appeal made to try to get people to get out to Constantinople to help with the quote-unquote Latin Empire, but this was not a very popular front. The Prussian Crusade, much like the Crusades in Spain and also the crusading that went on in the Holy Land, of course, these were popular fronts. These were considered very legitimate by the vast bulk of Latin Christendom. This was the conquering of the heathen, the Christianization of the heathen. This was valued. Now, for the Teutonic Knights, they had the advantage, too, that because of the arrangement they had with the Pope and the Emperor, the conquests that were gained as a result of these regular crusades, this territory was held by the Teutonic Knights. So it's not like a secular lord could come out there, be involved in a crusade, and then he's going to keep that territory. No, the Teutonic Knights were going to hold that territory. In particular, the Teutonic Knights had a very good relationship with the papacy. They had staff who were always in Rome, who were always there to attend the papal court. If something was going on in Prussia that maybe the Pope wasn't too happy about, their representatives there in Rome could, explain things away or try to smooth things over. The Teutonic Knights had estates throughout Europe, and so this also reduced the impact of losses in Prussia. And many times throughout the history of the Prussian Crusade, the Teutonic Knights suffered devastating losses from counterattacks by the Prussians. The Teutonic Knights had the advantage of better technology, better fortifications and weapons, but numerically they were much smaller than the native Prussians. The native Prussians also could make use of their better familiarity with the local terrain. They could use guerrilla tactics quite effectively. These guerrilla tactics could be very devastating, especially when an active crusade was not present, when the Teutonic Knights were just garrisoning their various remote fortresses. These could be vulnerable, even though they were strong fortresses. They were vulnerable to attack. Any type of movement of brothers could be vulnerable to attack. If you had to have a convoy of brothers ride from fortress to fortress for some reason, this was vulnerable. So there were several major reconquests by the native Prussians. These had to be pushed back again and again by the Teutonic Knights. And again, the fact that they had this resource of estates and wealth back in Europe throughout Christendom, this reduced the impact of these losses. It helped them to recover. And this is much like the Templars. There's kind of this idea about the Templars in Palestine that, the Saracens could cut a whole army of them down, and then a whole new army of them would spring up the next day because, recruits would flood in, funds would come in from the West. A similar thing was going on with the Teutonic Knights and their Prussian campaigns. And over the course of the 13th century, the donations to the Teutonic Order absolutely just grew enormously. They became one of the favorite donations in Christendom, a very popular order. Much like the Templars and Hospitallers, they were pretty close behind them in terms of their sponsors and in terms of the funds they had coming in. So let's ask ourselves, who joined the Teutonic Knights? Well, recruits were pretty much all from Germany. There were some non-Germans in their ranks, but overwhelmingly they were a German order. Most of their recruits came from Westphalia, the mid-Rhineland region, Franconia, Thuringia, and a lot of their recruits came from regions where the Teutonic Knights had estates, or regions close to that. They could work their connections in those areas, and this would stimulate interest in knights joining up with the Teutonic Knights. Now, at the very beginning, the requirement was anybody of military profession. So this could be a nobleman, this could also be a mercenary. But as the 13th century wore on and ideas of nobility became even more solidified, pretty much you only had members of the nobility joining and becoming knight brothers. Now, the Teutonic Knights, of course, were associated with Germany, and there was an attraction to the Teutonic Knights from the secular nobility of Germany. Now, we can kind of compare this to the situation in Spain. In Spain, you've got these local military orders, like the Knights of Calatrava, who were an order of warrior monks who were based in Castile. And in Spain, these local military orders had the function of helping permanently with this very localized interested crusade. So there's almost a national interest in that particular crusade. So there were certain secular monarchs or secular nobles who had a vested interest in that particular crusading front in Spain. The King of Castile, the King of Aragon, the King of Portugal. These and the various nobles of Spain, crusading had a spiritual appeal to people from throughout Christendom, but you've got this set of nobles who have a local interest in that crusade. And the military orders of Spain sprung up to be a part of that. Now, in a similar way, the Crusades in the Baltic and the North had a natural local appeal to certain territorial interests, like Germany, for example. And so in some ways, the Teutonic Knights kind of had a character like that of the military orders of Spain, in that they were the natural allies, I guess you could say, of crusaders who would happen to be from a certain region. but they were very different from the orders in Spain. The orders in Spain were under the authority of specific monarchs like the King of Aragon, the King of Castile, the King of Portugal, but the Teutonic Knights were not under the authority of a specific monarch. They had a close relationship with the German emperor, but they were an independent order. And so in this way, they kind of were able to use the nobility of Germany more for their own ends rather than the other way around, which was the case in Spain. So how did recruitment work for the Teutonic Knights? Well, I want to take a look at a passage from the Northern Crusades, a book by Eric Christensen, to answer that question. The rule laid down that candidates for admission as knight brothers should be able to give satisfactory answers to the same 5 questions that were asked of postulant Templars. Do you belong to any other order? Are you married? Have you any hidden physical infirmity? Are you in debt? Are you a serf? 5 no's, and then the candidate had to give 5 yeses. Are you prepared to fight in Palestine or elsewhere, to care for the sick, to practice any craft you know as ordered, to obey the rule? Then he made his profession. I do profess and promise chastity, renunciation of property and obedience to God, and to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and to you, brother, master of the Teutonic Order, and to your successors, according to the rules and institutions of the order. And I will be obedient to you and to your successors, even unto death. Notice here the Blessed Virgin Mary included in that oath. The Teutonic Knights had a particular devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and much as Palestine was viewed as Christ's domain, like Christ's inheritance and heritage on earth, the Prussia was almost kind of viewed as Mary's land, as kind of this particular association with Mary. And so the Teutonic Knights had a particular order devotion to the Blessed Virgin. Very interesting. So the brother knights of the Teutonic Order, they had the dual role of knight and monk. They had full religious observance, they recited the office, they lived the very regimented and communal life of a monastic order. However, they also had full-on knightly duties, with few of the privileges that were afforded to secular knights. This is also from Christensen's book. Their equipment and armor were uniform, each man being issued with a pair of shirts, a pair of breeches, 2 pairs of boots, neither loose nor tight, 1 surcoat, 1 sleeping bag, 1 blanket, 1 breviary, and 1 knife. He could have 2 or 4 mounts as ordered, but they were not his own. They belonged to the convent. He was not allowed to consort with laymen, and his fur coat had to be cheap, goatskin or sheepskin. He had to sleep in his shirt, breeches, and boots, and was not allowed to put a lock or fastening on his box. He had to remain silent at meals and in dormitory, on the march and in the latrine. His only lawful amusement was the solitary one of wood carving. All the courtesy and conviviality of secular knighthood was forbidden. He could not display his own coat of arms if he had one. Argent, a cross sable, was good enough for all. He was not allowed to joust or to hunt most forms of game. He could kill only wolves and bears, but without the assistance of hounds. He could let his beard grow, but his hair had to be short and neat. So the goal here was efficiency. Mobilization, marches, camping, guard duty, these were all done by a strict routine. They were done in silence. The Teutonic Knight, he didn't own his weapons or his horses, and plunder belonged to the order. So despite all this, he was nevertheless expected to have a ruling and governing role like a knight. He had to intimidate and he had to fight. There were strong temptations against chastity for somebody involved in military activity, because war would often put women at the mercy of a conquering Teutonic Knight. There was strong prohibition against rape. However, if the Teutonic Knights' enemies are to be believed, they didn't always keep to that restriction. The sort of guys who would have been attracted to this kind of life would have been individuals looking for atonement through service to God. In some ways, I mean, these were the sort of people who would have been attracted to join a lot of different religious orders, except this would have been particularly attractive to military men. Your typical Teutonic Knight may have been a pretty rough guy. Nevertheless, Latin Christendom approved of this idea of the crusade against the heathen, and so this was absolutely a mainstream course of action to take in pursuing a Christian life. This was as legitimate for Latin Christian society at this time as joining the Franciscans. For us today, from the perspective of 21st century Christianity, it's difficult to imagine this, but nevertheless, this was the case. It was an incredibly hard life. It was incredibly dangerous, a very unforgiving of mistakes. One wrong move, one mess up out there in the desolate wilds of Prussia, and the pagan heathen would descend upon you, and torture and brutality would await you. So it was not the sort of life that the faint of heart would be attracted to, and it was very unforgiving in terms of personal reward, like financial reward. If you were looking to gain personal wealth or power, this probably wasn't the life for you. If you felt guilty about certain past sins and wanted to do penance for them and atone for them in a profession that was more suited to your previous life, your secular life, then this sort of very rugged existence and dangerous existence may have been attractive to you. Now, the Knight brothers were not the only individuals involved in the Teutonic Order and in the efforts of the Prussian Crusade. They were assisted by priests and sisters who ran hospitals, education, charity. Feeding of the hungry went right along with the monastic war machine. So, yeah, much like as life in Crusader Palestine, there was the war effort, there was also charitable effort. Now, very interestingly, the Teutonic Knights were able to make use of secular individuals from Germany in a way that helped with their long-term war effort. They invited certain knights to come out and become vassals to the order. So when certain conquests were made as the result of a crusade, certain secular knights from back in Christendom who might want to come out and hold a lordship, they could do that. The Teutonic Knights had a place for that. You could come out, you could hold a little lordship, and you would be a vassal to the order. But again, the Teutonic Order was very careful to maintain their overall control of this whole thing. So these people would have very much been vassals. They would have been dependents of the order. But, it was an opportunity for certain very enterprising and maybe devil-may-care type guys who wanted to get out there and do something in the wilds of Prussia. Also, as they established settlements, they invited merchants and people to settle in the area from back home. And there was certain opportunity for that to stimulate the local economy, to get some of the local trade and that sort of thing going. So the Teutonic Knights used all of this to help bolster their efforts to expand and conquer pagan Prussia. Very important group from this category would be immigrants from Germany who were masons, because castle building was enormously important. This was crucial to the Teutonic Knights, especially to hold territory during the winter months, which were the most dangerous time. Their forces were reduced. It was pretty much just to the brothers who were garrisoning their fortresses. So, very capable masons were coming in from Christendom to construct these very important castles. Also, experts in crossbows and catapults and artillery. Such men were brought in to help with the war effort. So the Teutonic Knights took full advantage of secular resources from back home to make this thing happen. So guys, that's it for the podcast for today. Next time, we're going to get a little more into the narrative aspect of the Livonian Crusade and the Prussian Crusade, so more of a narrative of the events. This podcast really was to kind of give an overview of how the Teutonic Order functioned, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like what I do, you can support me on Patreon or donate via PayPal. There are links down below. And also pick up a copy of my novel of the Crusades, Why Does the Heathen Rage? There's a link to that page on Amazon down below as well. I'll talk to you guys soon.